Welcome, 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 everyone. It's wonderful to be here today. Very, very excited about today's session. It's from our How a Coach Can Help series, and we're going to be talking about how a coach can help me get senior leaders to take my ideas seriously. Please do type in the chat where you are logging in from. We always like to know. Whether you're in the UK or further afield, we would love to know. So do type in the chat and let us know where you are watching from. So we are live, and I am very happy to share this session with you today. I'm Jenny Garrett, and a little bit about me. I've been coaching for about 20 years now. I run my own leadership consultancy, and we work across 3 areas: inclusive leadership, entrepreneurial leadership, and AI-ready leadership. Because whether we like it or not, that's where the world is heading, and leaders need to be prepared. I'm also the founder of the Diverse Executive Coach Directory, which is where our 2 brilliant guests come from today. I set it up to solve a problem I kept seeing. Organizations wanting to work with a diverse group of coaches, but not knowing where to find them. So we've created the Diverse Coach Directory to increase visibility for talented coaches from global majority or ethnically diverse backgrounds. My latest book, Equality versus Equity, tackles issues of race in the workplace. And we've got a dog who's very happy to hear that. We tackle issues of race in the workplace in a really practical way. I also have another book on the way, but I'll share that at another time. Before we dive in, I want to say a huge thank you on behalf of Rocking Your Teens, the social enterprise we're supporting today. Every donation goes directly towards building resilience and raising aspirations in teenagers. And if you'd like to know more, head to rockingyourteens.com. My colleague Tanya will be popping the appropriate links in the chat, so do look out for them. Now, today's topic. I want to ask you something and be honest. Have you ever sat in a meeting, made a suggestion, and watched it land not very well? Or worse, watch someone else say the same thing 10 minutes later and them get the credit? If you're nodding, because I am, you're not alone. Research from the Workforce Institute of UKG found that 60% of UK employees feel their voice has been ignored by their manager or employer. And Great Place to Work's 2025 study shows only 48% believe their suggestions are genuinely considered. So this isn't about you being too quiet or not good enough. This is a systemic issue, and it's one we can actually do something about. So today we're going to explore why ideas don't always land, even when they're good ones, how to understand where influence really sits in an organization, how to position yourself and your ideas so they resonate with senior leaders, and how to build your
Hi everyone. Sorry, I think we're having some technical issues. I'm just going to step in here while we're just to pick up. So let's see. I'd like to kick off by asking a question over to Jay. So I'd like to start by saying, Jay, you've spent over 25 years coaching leaders. You've been named Leadership Coach of the Year, and your whole approach is about what you call life work collisions. Those moments where what's happening in someone's life crashes into what's happening at work. You're described as refreshingly direct and surprisingly practical. So I'm going to ask you a direct question. When someone comes to you saying my ideas aren't being taken seriously at the top table, what's actually going on? Is it the ideas, the delivery, the politics, or something deeper about how that person is showing up in the room?
Thanks, Tanya. Hi, everyone. I'm Jay Jupp. I started performance coaching, so I'll just give you a quick introduction. I started performance coaching back in 1998, and for more than 25 years, I have combined coaching with working inside organizations in either learning, leadership, talent, and organizational development roles. And I come to this conversation from a few different angles. I've been the person trying to get senior leaders to listen. I've been in senior leadership roles where decisions are being made, and I have coached people, and I continue to coach people who are trying to be heard and have influence inside complex organisations. I also deeply care about fairness and voice and having people stay true to themselves in systems that don't always make it that easy. So when I hear phrases like be more strategic, have more gravitas, be more visible, or build better relationships, I just know how frustrating it is. And, nobody tells you what that actually means or explains how to do it. So it just makes you feel frustrated, I would say. So that's where I think coaching can really help, and I can make, it can make, the unspoken rules of influence more visible and help people find a way to be heard with more clarity, confidence, and impact. So I am looking forward to the conversation.
Great, thank you. I'm sorry I got cut off. I was chatting away and didn't realise I wasn't even here. So thank you so much for Tanya for stepping in. And I'm imagining you've just introduced yourself, Jay. So shall I get Nita to introduce herself before we go into the questions?
I think so, yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, welcome, Nita. Please do say a few words about yourself.
Hi, I'm Nita Sharma, and I've been a coach for more years I care to remember. And one of the things I did about 15 years ago, I retrained myself as a coach because I felt I wanted a new approach, a new way of looking at things. So now in 2026, I work as a leadership coach, facilitator, and a supervisor who supervises coaches and consultants. I probably have worked in every continent going in the last 30 years. And not only that, I've coached individuals across various industries, again, globally. And what keeps me going is the love of connecting with people and actually helping people to have a greater impact in what they want to do, both in their personal life and in their professional life.
Thank you so much. I hope that everyone listening can see why I chose both of you as guests for today. You have such a wealth of knowledge and experience, both in the UK and beyond to bear. So this is shaping up to be a fantastic conversation already, and I'm super excited about it. So Jay, you probably had the question already that I had posed from Tanya, but I'm going to repeat it anyway. So what we know is you've spent 25 years coaching leaders. You've been named Leadership Coach of the Year, and your whole approach is about what you call life-work collisions. And that's really interesting because there's so much debate around this holistic view, isn't there, in terms of life and work. So those moments where, what's happening in someone's life crashes into what's happening at work. And you're described as refreshingly direct and surprisingly practical. So I'm going to ask you a very direct question. When someone comes to you saying, my ideas aren't being taken seriously at the top table, what's actually going on? Is it the ideas, the delivery, the politics, or something deeper about how that person is showing up in the room? I'm really curious on your insights on that. What do you think?
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. I don't usually think it's one thing. It could be the idea, it could be the delivery, the politics, the system, or how the person is showing up. What I know is that quite often it's several of those things happening at once. So one of the first things a coach can actually help you do is widen the lens. So not only looking inward, but also looking and exploring what else might be going on. So, excuse me, when we feel unheard, it's really easy to make it personal. I know I can do it, and I've done it. You start replaying the conversation. What did I say? How did I say it? Should I have been clearer, stronger, more confident? And there's some useful learning in that. So I'm not saying we don't want to reflect on that, but it's not always the whole story. And a coach can help you ask what else might be going on in the room. So they ask you questions like who was present, what pressures were they under, what were their needs or concerns, what might their objections actually really been about, and who needed to have been aligned before the conversation even happened. I'd also want to understand the outcomes for the person. Do they want this idea that they've got to be specific? Is that the specific idea that they want to be improved? Or do they want credibility, more influence, being able to influence more? Or do they just want to stop feeling dismissed? Those are very different outcomes. And I'd also be listening to what is happening for the person too. Are they shrinking, over-explaining, trying to prove themselves, or carrying previous negative experiences into the room? So for me, coaching really helps untangle all of that, the person, the idea, the room, and the system. And from there, the person you're working with, the coachee, the client, can choose a more deliberate way forward without losing themselves in the process.
I think what you're saying is so helpful, because I think we often look at it from one angle, don't we? Either, I don't get politics, or I need to improve how I show up, my presence, or whatever it is. But what you're saying is actually the coach helps you probably look at the places that you haven't considered, think about it holistically, and then move yourself forward from it with an informed knowledge. Because I think often people will say in coaching, I've never thought about it that way. I've never considered it. That's a new angle for me. Yeah. So I really hear your points there. And I wonder, I know something that you talk about is measurable change. And I saw in one of your programs, there was a 25% increase in a leadership capability. When we're talking about getting heard, what does progress actually look like? How does someone know it's working?
Yeah, that program, that example that you've mentioned came from a leadership development program I designed. And the interesting part is that when I shared that idea with my manager for the first time, he rejected it. It didn't land. So because I believed in it and knew the thinking was strong, my first reaction was just what I described before, thinking about, oh my gosh, the idea's been rejected. Maybe I haven't explained it properly. They just don't get it. But actually, there was a lot more going on. So when I left that first meeting, the idea still felt like it was mine. I hadn't transferred any motivation or energy to the manager. My manager hadn't found any connection to it or any reason to back it, funnily enough. So rather than keep pushing directly, I did speak to one of my manager's peers, sense check the idea, was I barking up the wrong tree, and the thinking, and they, and then brought them into the conversation. So it was definitely the same idea, but it was a very different dynamic, and it no longer felt like it was just me trying to convince someone. And the revelation, which I don't think a lot of people hear, is that my manager, to their credit, later reflected honestly and said part of their initial resistance was that they hadn't come up with the idea themselves. And that insight, I know, it's a shocker, but I actually appreciated it, because that really taught me that good ideas on their own are not enough. You know, they might make sense to me, or, you know, but there's typically something else going on, and people need to find a way to connect themselves to it before they back it. And in this case, there was another layer too. There was this expectation, and it was behind the scenes, and I didn't know it, that the program would be more assessment led. But I was proposing it was genuine development. So, you know, I had to hold that line. So if we were calling it development, it genuinely had to be that. And the program did go ahead as development. And when we measured leadership capability before and after, you know, we did demonstrate that there had been a 25% improvement. So progress for me is not just getting the idea approved. Progress is when you understand more clearly what's happening around the idea, and you get to choose your next step with more intention, and being more deliberate. And that's where the coach can help. They can help you explore what you're really trying to achieve, who needs to connect with that idea, what expectations you might be walking into, where might you need to adapt, where you need to hold the line, like I did, because the purpose of the development in this case really mattered. So it becomes less about why aren't they listening to me, and more about what is needed for the idea to move forward in the right way.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I love that it's a very concrete example. And what I'm really enjoying is actually you didn't give up. You were like, okay, I got a rejection. Let me regroup. Let me get some other perspectives, which is the sort of thing a coach can, you kind of sort out, alliance stroke coach. And then you went back, and how open and vulnerable and how great actually was that manager to say, I didn't like it because it wasn't my idea. But, you know, now I've realized that takes quite a lot, actually, particularly if you're working with a hierarchical organization. But that thought, you know, how many people listening are thinking, yeah, I got a no, and I just thought, that's it. Instead of thinking, actually, let me think about another way. And let me see if someone can help me consider another way. And coaches can really help you get that game plan, and really think about the right approach, strategic, political, really thinking about your own strengths. So really nice example. And also the empathy you can bring to coaching from having that experience as well is really important. So love that. Thank you so much, Jay. I want to say a big hello to Maynaz. Great to see you here as always. And lovely to see you. And I know I'll be seeing you in July, and I'm looking forward to it, Maynaz. So great that you're here. I know you always have great ideas and thoughts and insights. And anyone else is here, we can't see you unless you type a hello in the chat and let us know where you're watching from. So please don't be shy. We love to know who's here. So I'm going to move on now. Nita, you work with leaders on what you call the saboteurs and limiting patterns that get in the way. And you talk about coaching as the courage to assert rather than seek permission. That phrase made me stop and think, the courage to assert rather than seek permission, because I think it gets right to the heart of what's happening for a lot of people. When we're not being taken seriously, there's the external side, how we're communicating, who's in the room, what the politics are. But there is an inner game that I think most of us will recognize. What are the saboteurs you most often see in people who feel overlooked? And how do you help them notice those patterns without beating themselves up about it? Because just to add one thing there, I've often had the experience with coaching people sometimes that they feel a bit embarrassed. They're like, oh, why didn't I think of that? Why didn't I realize that sooner? Why did it take this conversation for me to realize? So there's something in the coaching that is also gentle, isn't it, with the coachee as they have realizations. But would love your reflections, Nita. You're muted at the moment, Nita.
Thank you, Jenny. The first thing I want to say is saboteurs and limiting beliefs. You know, we all I've lived through it and I continue to live through it. So it's something that I think is always work in progress. But I also want to say, as a first thing, is that as human beings, we all tend to delete and distort our experiences. By that, I mean, we all pay attention to some things and don't see the other patterns that might be existing. And sometimes lurking underneath our way of operating are our saboteurs or gremlin, as I've discovered when I first did my coach training 15 years ago. And what was a revelation for me was looking at these saboteurs, was noticing the sensations that they had in my own body and in my own mind by, the thought I had, and I'll talk about it a little bit around what are some of the ways that saboteurs and limiting beliefs manifest themselves. And there also, for me, while I was doing that, is a whole access around what I felt in my body, where the saboteur lived. I wasn't even aware of it until I started paying attention to it. And again, I'll go into a little bit more around that in a minute. So how do saboteurs and limiting beliefs manifest ourselves, particularly in the context of people when they feel overlooked? Now, this isn't an exhaustive list. This is something that I've observed with, coaching senior leaders or leaders across different sectors. The first one that I've always noticed is I'm not good enough. So there is something around I'm not good enough. I don't feel I have agency. I can't control what's going on. I might actually be in my head going, oh, I'm better than them, or they're better than me. So that is a limiting saboteur going on. Perfectionism. And if I try really hard, maybe I'll get what I want. They won't like what I have to say, so I've got to stay small and keep quiet. Or they might think my idea is stupid. And one of the things that Jay was sort of saying also is about my own previous experience, that I can bring, and maybe they won't listen to me. The other thing that I notice sometimes in a coaching session, not with all clients, but some clients, where they're coming from, and they're not aware of it, from a blaming place. And because internally they feel, I can't ask for what I want. Playing safe to stay invisible, as I think Jay was sort of touching on. The other one that this morning I was coaching a senior leader, and she was saying, I'm a people pleaser. And I also like to, what was there something I wrote down? I like to be needed. So what she did was, as a part of her own saboteur, those couple of things, not in the context of, being overlooked, but in the context of her saboteur she was carrying around. Now, how, as we, as individuals, as coaches, enable and help our coachees? And the approach that I like to take, the first and foremost, is coming from a place of curiosity, not judgment. So for me, curiosity is spacious, expansive. And the art in that space is not only for the coach to be curious, but to get the coachee to be curious about what is going on for them, whether it's in their head or whether it's in their sensations in their body. And I think those are very important things for the coach and the coachee to explore in that context. Because when we can begin to pay attention to the sensations we're experiencing, we can begin to notice. Pay attention.
Yeah, I think you're making such good points. I just wanted to jump in on the blame piece that you said.
Yes.
I don't think that's something people talk about very much. the fact that actually, when you start blaming other people, you're feeling like you've got no ownership, no agency. It's always them, isn't it?
Yes,
And
yes.
I'm curious about that, and the body that you're talking about, how that might make people feel.
Well, actually, that when they are in that space, it makes them feel more like a victim, that they don't have agency. They can't make a difference. When I hear somebody blaming and I notice it in a coaching session, I might say to them, I'm just observing that there's a lot of energy that you're putting in making the fault of the other person not doing what you want them to do. What do you think that is all about for you? So and they may not be aware of it. They may have a script in their mind that's saying, poor me. The only way to get things, if I, or my strategy is, if I continue to complain, then I can stay small. I can stay in my lane, so to speak. So for me, the most powerful thing in a coaching situation is get the individual themselves to notice their own behaviors. Maybe some of those behaviors are not behaviors, and maybe they're identity issues that we need to kind of explore as to where that comes from, which we'll talk about in terms of psychodynamic and neuroscience, basically. The other thing that I think when we're coaching someone who's probably holding themselves small, not asserting themselves, is what's the impact and the cost to them? And I don't think that sometimes individuals, because of the strategy, a learned strategy they have, which they're very familiar with, don't recognize the impact and the cost of them maintaining their saboteurs, And I remember the first time when I was being coached, and I realized my little saboteur. And I thought, oh my God, what do I do with it? Do I banish it? And one of the things I realized that actually what I do, and it's the work that I also do with my clients, is to befriend the saboteur. Because the saboteur in us doesn't go away. We just learn to quieten its voice. And by the way, the other thing that I do in my coaching session is get the individual to access the wise part of themselves, that can be a counter to their saboteur, and also get them to explore what may be allowing them to continue their sort of limiting beliefs. So I think the role of a coach, and it's not the only place they can do this work. People can do the work on their own. However, with a coach, you can really shine a light. You can develop strategies that would enable the individual to come from a place of choice and option and practical action, which is what it's all about. If someone's in pain and they don't realize they're in pain, and through the coaching process, you shine a light on it, the individual goes, oh my God, oh, I do have a choice. I do have an option of what I can do about that. So for me, there is a way of countering, but the key thing is self-awareness, noticing, and then from the noticing, thinking about what options and what choices are open to me, and what actions do I want to take to build on that. And before I go, I want to sort of give an experience of a coachee who, every time she spoke about meeting senior leaders, she'd go, and she'd shrink. And just in that, moment of paying attention to her and sharing my observation, and she thought, oh God, I didn't realize I did that. I didn't realize I quietened my voice. I shrank. And what was really great, that subsequently when she went to talk to senior leaders, she told herself, I'm going to be different. I'm going to have a different strategy. I'm going to be aware of my breathing. I'm going to be aware of how I'm talking, so that she could have the intention and the impact that she wanted. So we can shift from that way to something which is more expansive and more yummy, so to speak.
Yes, I love the yumminess. And absolutely, I was facilitating a session this morning, and I was asking some managers about the difference they saw in their participants of this program. And one person said that, they're just sitting up straighter in their seat, and there's just something different about them. So the somatic sense that you're bringing to this coaching, the bodily sense, those indications, we might think it's all about what we say and what we do, but sometimes it's our posture, our smile. These things make a big difference as well. So thank you so much for bringing that into the conversation.
I just want to say something, this morning as I'm sitting here, I had my little saboteur going. I grounded myself. My feet are flat on the floor because I want to be in that space where I'm resourceful and we can do all sorts of things. And I do believe that, coaching has come on a lot, but somatic coaching, I think, has provided such a expansive area for us to sort of begin to pay attention to ourselves in a holistic way.
Yeah, and we probably could talk about that all day, to be honest with you, especially with people sitting at desks a lot, and I think using their brain and losing touch with their body. So maybe that's another session we'll have. But I just wanted to pick up on Maynaz's point here. She says, I've joined a store where it's male dominated. I'm the only female leader, and that is one tactic I've noticed. Senior leaders playing the blame game. Sometimes as leaders, we need to be humble enough to be honest. And when you don't, you do not. Oh, I can't see that last word. But I think what she, ultimately saying a little bit, maybe drawing on both of your points, be honest, like your leader was, Jay. It wasn't my idea, so I didn't advocate for it, first of all, but also that sense of actual vulnerability and not playing the blame game, because it doesn't serve anyone. So thank you both so much. There's so much more we could talk about, and we will. But I also want to say hi to Ed, who's listening from sunny Rome. Hi, Ed. Great to see you here. And also Donna, great to see you here as well. Don't worry about the technical problems. I had them too at the beginning of this session. We overcome. So that's the main thing. Okay, so moving back to yourself, Jay, actually, let's think about what we ask you next, about what you would like to share. And I maybe want to talk a bit about reading the room and maybe reading the system you find yourself in. I think this is particularly pertinent because there are lots of people who are changing jobs at the moment and moving into new environments. And there's a lot of change in the world of work and transformation. Nearly every organization we work with is going through some sort of transformation at the moment. And so I think reading the room is particularly important. You've worked across industries, small companies to large corporates, and you've sat in senior leadership yourself as a head of talent and OD. So you know where decisions really get made. And it's really rarely in the meeting itself, is it? So can you take us inside that a little bit? How does power and influence actually flow in most organizations? And where should someone be putting their energy if they want their ideas to land? I think because a lot of people are trying to convince the wrong audience in the wrong room at the wrong moment. So tell us more.
Yes, that is so true. I think quite often we misunderstand how influence works. And, we often think it is that meeting. I've got the meeting, I'm going, that's where the influence needs to happen. But usually the influence started way before anybody stepped into the room, I would say. So it's the conversations beforehand, it's the trust that's been built, it's whether the right people understand the idea well enough to back it. So in coaching, I'd help someone map that system around the idea. So who has formal power? Who has informal influence? Who needs to understand it? Who might feel exposed if they back it? Who may need to carry it in the room when we're not there? So there is a lot to consider. And I saw this when I was in a senior role. A member of my team had they had redesigned the performance management process, and in my opinion, it was genuinely well thought through. When we presented it to the senior sponsor, and I was the support act, not the person presenting, that senior sponsor didn't respond as positively as we'd expected. At first, my team member was like, oh, this is a bit confusing. But we were adamant that the thinking was strong. But what I noticed, though, was that they weren't necessarily rejecting the idea. I think they had expected to contribute to it. And because we presented something quite complete, we had unintentionally taken that opportunity away. So there was and there's also like a risk element as well that senior sponsors need to consider. So, or they do consider. So in this senior sponsor, when they needed to take the idea to an executive team, for example, they need to understand the story behind it. Why this? Why now? Why is it better than what we've already got? What questions might my peers then ask me? So if they don't feel comfortable answering those questions, they might feel that they are carrying the reputational risk. So their hesitation was a signal to us that we hadn't brought them into the thinking early enough. And that's where a coach can help, I think, that they can help someone move from why didn't they like it to what might this person need in order to understand, shape, and sponsor this confidently. So the work is not just about polishing the presentation. It is understanding who needs to be involved before the point, and how to bring them in thoughtfully. Yeah, so they would be my.
Thank you. And it builds on the Donna has put a point in the chat which I think very much aligns to what you're saying, which is we need to think about not just the person but the system. We, as a coach, most of the time we are working one-to-one, and so we can only help the person consider the system. So it is about their different types of intervention. We also can have group coaching with senior leaders or leadership teams, but the coaching intervention itself is often that one-to-one thinking space, isn't it? And helping people come up with a plan to move forward, or come up with solutions and understand themselves better. But you're very much acknowledging that the system is part of this, and without considering the system, people can make real mistakes in terms of how they move forward. So just a quick follow-up question. And what about the person who's been advised to build relationships with senior leaders, but who finds that advice a bit hollow? They don't know how, they don't have the access, really important, or it feels inauthentic. What do you say to them?
Yeah, no, I've definitely heard that myself. So I have a lot of empathy for with that type of hollow advice. And I used to get told things like, be more strategic, build relationships with senior leaders. And it feels hollow because no one actually explains what that means or why it's necessary. And it can also feel uncomfortable because people can worry, look, am I sucking up? Or is it going to look like that? Or am I playing politics? And how will that look? And people from global majority backgrounds, there's another additional layer there. Will I be judged differently for doing this? Will I seem a bit pushy? Do I have the same informal access to the senior conversations like you mentioned, Jenny? And and I think Nita was talking about this earlier. And then there's the story we tell ourselves that senior leaders are too busy to make time for us. Little old me. Of course they're busy, but the question becomes, am I asking for time without a clear purpose? Or am I creating a conversation that connects to something they care about? So when I became the head of talent, I had to reframe that for myself. I wasn't building relationships for visibility or approval. I was trying to understand my customers better, their priorities, their pressures, what they needed from the talent and OD team, and what mattered to them as people and leaders. And that really helped me become more relevant and trusted because I could connect my work to what mattered to them. And from a coaching perspective, I'd help someone make that practical. So firstly, what stories are you telling yourself about approaching senior leaders? What feels awkward or inauthentic? And I've definitely felt that struggle. What assumptions are you carrying? What would make the conversation useful on both sides? And how can you build trust in a way that still feels like you? So building relationships is not about becoming someone's favorite necessarily. It's about becoming someone that they can trust, and someone who can understand their context and add value.
Thank you so much. I think you've given a gift of so many great coaching questions. So I'm really hoping people are writing them down because they can absolutely be journaling away on them. So I want to go back to Nita. Our time is going so quickly today. And Nita, let's come back to that phrase of yours I really love, the courage to assert rather than seek permission. Because actually, this is where practically I think a lot of mid-level and senior level professionals get stuck. They've been socialized to ask to check, to flag, and then they wonder why they're not seen as leadership material. What does asserting yourself actually look like when you're not the most senior person in the room? How do you carry yourself? How do you speak? How do you make your decisions visible without tipping over into arrogance or bulldozing over other people? And I've definitely seen it go that way. So, yeah, what are your thoughts, Nita?
Well, sometimes it's a fine line, and I think one of the things I'd like to start off with, which we've touched on earlier, when we're asserting ourselves, is about balancing confidence with humility. So that for me is always something to bear in mind. That phrase about, have courage rather than seek permission is a lovely one for me, because it also touches on, what Jay was talking about, being authentic. Now, one of the things that I think when we're coming from a place of asserting ourselves, and bearing in mind people can project all sorts of things, particularly on women, if they're being assertive. But for me, being assertive means coming from a place that's adult, that's about being clear in our communication, being concise in our communication, being respectful in terms of who is in the room, and being intentional. So in a sense, what I'm saying is that we're sort of self-managing. And the other element of that is how we hold ourselves. We talked a little bit about somatically. So we need our words and our physiology, our composure to go hand in hand. We also, if we're not being, we're being given the task of being operational, and then we're told go into more strategic, it's about maybe taking that psychological space and saying, I'm going to have this conversation rather than apologizing or caviting for my perspective. The other thing that I think is really important, and perhaps that's an essential part of our inner game, because we may not have a structure or role power. However, we have personal power and agency. And I think one of the things that we need to be aware of, and certainly the work that I've done with some of my coachees is to recognize their own personal power and their own personal agency, even though, as I said, they may not have structural or role power in that respect. I think that is very, very important. And leading in from that, I think when we bring these things together, when we're comfortable in ourselves, when we're self-managing and being authentic, it has the capacity whereby we can be receptive to what's going on in the room. We can read the room. It's a behavior that I often talk about with senior leaders, because it's about being attuned. It's a being reading the room, what's going on, picking up, building on points that other people are saying. Because sometimes when we're not coming from a place of asserting ourselves, we're actually focusing too much on ourselves and not enough on what it is going on in the room. So I think a sense of self-acceptance, and that whatever their colleagues might be saying, listening, asking great questions. Because when we're comfortable in ourselves, we're expansive. I mean, that's my key word for today, is that
Love
we're
it.
expansive. We're not
Love
getting
it.
in our own way. And
Yeah.
I think those are the key elements of assertion, really. It's a whole mixture of things, not just, the words. It's about how all of those things we hold ourselves together in.
Thank you. And you've mentioned women, and Jay mentioned those from the global majority earlier. But I just wondered if there was a bit more you wanted to say about that. For women and people from global majority backgrounds and intersectional identities, their voice has been historically less welcome in senior spaces. I attended an event last night about women in power and politics, and the experiences of women in political life, whether that's a local councillor to being, in the Houses of Parliament. It's a horrendous experience. So when people just say something like "just assert yourself," it doesn't land the same way as it might do to someone who maybe has a better sense of belonging in different spaces. I just wonder, any thoughts on how you coach someone through that complexity?
I think it is a complexity, and I think the first step is recognize, it's not your stuff. It's the stuff that is coming, and I'm long in the tooth. I know that people can project their stuff onto me, and it's about being aware that you don't get hooked into it. For me, it's and it's also about holding yourself in your own space of what you're like. And there's enough evidence around for the last 30 years. I've done a lot of research. A woman, when she's assertive, can often be seen as aggressive, and I think sadly in 2026 that can still go on. And it can equally apply to people from global majority, or whatever they think they are. You've got a bit of a chip on their shoulder or something, And I think what we have to do is hold ourselves from a place of self-acceptance and say, I know the environment, the system that I'm working in may have that. However, this is how I'm going to hold myself, and I'm not going to get hooked into their way of thinking, really. That would be one of the things that I would, get an individual to look at the system that they're operating in and the choices they can make within that for themselves.
Thank you very much. Okay, we've just got a few minutes left. So if anyone does have any questions, please do type them in the chat. Meanwhile, I will ask a final question. So I'm going to start with you, Jay. If someone's watching this today and thinking, I've got something valuable to contribute, but I'm tired of not being heard, what's one thing that they could try differently this week? Just one small thing.
Thanks, Jenny. One small shift would be this. Before trying to get someone to understand your idea, spend a bit more time understanding what matters to them. to the people you're trying to influence. So when we feel unheard, we can't talk about it, we go inward, we try and justify more, we try harder, etc. But sometimes that can keep us stuck because we're trying to get somebody to understand us before we actually understand what matters to that person. So this week, my challenge, choose one conversation where you can go in with curiosity rather than telling or selling. And then notice what you're learning about that person's world or their world, what they're focused on, what pressures they might be under, what might be getting in the way, and what would be useful from where they sit. And then just reflect afterwards. What did I learn? What did I hear? What was important? What can I say? What do I now understand that I perhaps didn't before? Does my idea still fit? Does the idea need refining? Does the framing need to change? Or do I need to bring others in early, like we've kind of talked about, to shape it, to feel part of it? Because you can hold the purpose, I would say, more tightly and just hold the idea lightly. And these conversations will help shape it. So sometimes the first step to being heard is showing that you genuinely are willing to listen first. That would be my advice.
Love that. Thank you. And the same question to Nita. You're muted, I think. Mm-hmm.
I think Jay's already touched on one of the starting places is about curiosity. I also think it's important for the individual to sort of think about is before they take their first baby step, which I always think is important, as I did with my senior coachee this morning, is start with baby steps. Is ask themselves, what do I want? As opposed to what often people say in a coaching situation is what they don't want. What do they want to see happen that's differently from the way things are? So I would sort of say that, start with that, with curiosity, and actually start again taking small baby steps, because without, let me just rephrase that. Through self-awareness, we can then begin to notice, and through noticing, we can then begin to take, gives us options and choices. And from there, we can take small baby steps of action that might be useful for us.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes, everyone wants to take giant leaps, but step by step gets you the same place and probably much safer. And you know that you're going in the right direction. So yeah, couldn't agree more. What's the smallest, quickest thing that you can do actually that feels right for you is the way forward. Thank you both so very much. It's been a really enlightening conversation. We're at our wrap-up place. So I want to say a massive thank you to Jay and Nita. I think it was brilliant. I hope everyone listening has at least one takeaway, whether we're thinking about saboteurs, my saboteur barks. Whether we're thinking about saboteurs, whether we're thinking about being persistent and persevering, whether we're thinking about different strategies and having that thinking space, whether we're thinking about the system and our place within it. There are so many different ways to make sure our ideas are taken seriously. And I think what our coaches have given us have been real strong practical strategies grounded in the workplace, but also that understanding that we need to take a step back. We need to think and understand more deeply what's going on, particularly if you've been trying and you've been hitting a brick wall, and that the answers are sometimes just not in you going over and over it by yourself, but seeking support, noticing what's happening in your body, noticing patterns, understanding the system. That's how you actually break through. So I hope you've got so much from that. I definitely have, as I always do from these amazing coaches. If you're interested in working with one of them or exploring other coaches we have in the directory, please do go to the Diverse Executive Coach Directory page. We have a page on LinkedIn. It's a growing directory connecting organizations with coaches from global majority, ethnically diverse backgrounds. And Tanya, I'm sure, will put the link in the chat. Our next in the How a Coach Can Help series is taking place on the 18th of June. And it's how a coach can help me set boundaries that actually stick to beat burnout, which is so common and so important to avoid because it takes a long time to come back from. So please do make sure you're subscribed to our Eventbrite channel, and then you'll be the first to hear about it. One last thing, your feedback genuinely shapes what we do next. So Tanya will add a link to a feedback form in the chat. It takes literally a minute to complete, and it really does help us make these sessions as useful as possible. So the last thing for me to say is a huge thank you to Jay, a huge thank you to Nita, and thank you to you all for being here and for brilliantly engaging in this session today, whether you're in Rome, the UK, or just in the virtual world somewhere. And, you know, there was a lot to take away from this session. You know, your ideas, if they're not landing, it isn't proof that you're not good enough. It's an invitation to get curious about how decisions are made, about how you're showing up, and about where the real levers of influence sit. So you don't need to wait for permission to be heard, but you might need a bit of support to work it out. And that's what our coaches are for. So take care, everyone. See you on the 18th of June, I hope. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.